One Piece Chapter 1187, the moment Sanji fans have been begging for ages at this point. It may be just about to happen. So let's dive into it, all of my thoughts, all the crazy theories that I've seen popping up. Let's go page by page through this most recent chapter. But before we get into this chapter, make sure you like the video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of my chapter breakdowns. Starting off with the cover story, very apropos for what we end up going over in this chapter, with Reiju protecting Sanji from all the evil ducklings that are his other siblings and his father. Picking up right where we left off with Luffy landing that legendary punch on Imu. And he sends him flying, even surprising the likes of Loki. A lot of people have either been downplaying this punch or downplaying Imu just because a punch was landed on him, and I want to set a couple things straight. First off, yes, this punch did injure Imu. Now, is this a fatal blow or an injury that's really going to lead to something else? Probably not, but this made Imu bleed, so it wasn't like this was a nothing burger punch. Luffy put some oomph into it, but just because Imu got caught off guard does not mean this is Imu downscale either. A lot of people seem to forget that Imu is not at full power right now. When Imu first landed on Elbaph, we saw him immediately coughing up blood, and he's also mentioned to Sommers multiple times that he does not have a lot of time here. It hasn't been fully confirmed, but it seems to be heavily implied that Imu cannot be here for too long. So either way, this was a great moment for Luffy, and this is not a downscale moment for Imu, it's just the beginning of a legendary fight. But as Imu is flying away, he sends these two black flames towards Luffy and Loki that look a lot like soot sprites to me. And I love this moment from Loki saying, "That was a really good shot, but honestly, you only landed it because I've already done so much damage to Imu." It feels a lot like our Zoro and Sanji rivalry, and with this being in a chapter like this, it really makes sense. Luffy notices that Loki is incredibly injured and he needs to go take a break, but of course, Loki's not hearing that. And at the same time, they notice that these soot sprites are landing on them. And Luffy starts to freak out, expecting it to be hot, but then acknowledging that it's more like a sting. And as Imu starts to load up their next attack, Luffy comments on how scary he looks up close. These two soot sprites are actually sentient, and they begin to talk to each other, saying that they were supposed to work their way towards Loki's wounds. Which begs the question, what happens if they do make it to your wound and possibly get inside? But with that, we get another named attack from Imu, the Blade of Hatred Stigma. And based on this panel, and then something we see a little bit later in this chapter, I really think that these fire sprites are actually honing mechanisms for Imu's abilities, basically making a guaranteed hit, kind of like an attack in a domain expansion. And also to that point, with these soot sprites going for wounds, and then this also seemingly being a fiery black blade, do these attacks cauterize the wounds as they land? I guess with Luffy saying that it doesn't necessarily burn, maybe not, but I'm really curious as to how these powers really work. And either way, we have Loki taking yet another massive hit from Imu. And I hate to say it, but this does lend a little bit more to the lack of stakes that I've been feeling in this arc, because Loki entered this fight already mortally wounded from what the Holy Knights did to him earlier in this arc. Gerd literally said it would take months for him to heal. Now he's been going toe-to-toe with Imu, he's been stabbed through the chest once and now twice, and we know it's really not going to make that much of a difference, he's just going to have to step aside for a moment. And another thing before we turn the page, I would like to note that whenever Imu activates this attack, the Shing has a bit of a musical note next to it, and the musicality of these gods has been very front-facing for this arc, obviously with Luffy's Drums of Liberation, with Imu coming into some kind of demonic song, and even the rain god Zaza having musical notes when she appeared. Music is crucial to this story. But now we jump over to the ice block, where first we get confirmation that the blast that Imu sent to it did absolutely nothing. And we have all the Straw Hats wearing themselves out, doing their best to try to damage it in any capacity, and they obviously cannot. We get this fantastic moment where the Straw Hats are debating if this is even ice, and of course we have Brook and Frankie go up to check it, and neither of them would even know if it was cold one way or another, and then Nami just crashes out saying, "Hey, I need an actual human to answer this question for me." I love that we can get pieces of comedy like this right in the middle of Imu literally sending laser beams through one of the strongest characters in the verse. But as they are debating what this ice is made of, Loki comes flying in, and his hammer is following close behind. The hammer bounces right off the ice block. And as the Straw Hats realize how injured Loki is, Ragnar converts back to his squirrel form, and then the ice begins to melt. We jump back to Imu loading up another attack on Luffy, and if you notice, the soot sprite is on his jacket. Luffy, with his underrated battle IQ, realizes immediately that he has to toss this jacket off. And like I said before, the fire blade seems to go straight through that jacket, so I do genuinely believe that these soot sprites have some kind of honing abilities. Luffy starts dashing towards Imu, and we hear the familiar sound of the Drums of Liberation. Jumping over near the western village at the Sea Cloud port, we have Zoro straight aura farming on St. Sommers. Zoro mentions that Sommers must be one of the 3 demons. And Sommers recognizes him, saying, "Oh, you were in the village earlier. What are you doing here? You don't want to get hurt. Look, we're just taking 10 or 20 kids. My companion will be back with them soon and we'll be out of your hair." And Zoro says, "Oh, your companion's over there? Well, turns out so is mine. So I'm guessing yours is not coming back." And Sommers smugly asks why. And Zoro comments because he'll be dead. I love to see the way Zoro talks about Sanji when Sanji's not in the room. That is one of the best indicators of a proper rivalry. These guys genuinely respect the hell out of each other. Of course, they're always going to be talking smack when they're in the room together, but when they're not, they have nothing but faith in the other one to get the job done every time. Sommers launches into an attack saying, do you know how on our game we are now? Obviously referencing the fact that Imu gave them that power buff. Now jumping up to the western village proper, it is raining so hard it's as if the sky has cracked. Which could be an interesting nod to a sky split, which is obviously a massive indicator of power, and we do have the rain god Zaza right here, but I might be reaching a little too much with that. And as Zaza continues to turn up on this village, we have Sanji lighting a cigarette, going over the game plan, figuring out what the hell he can do about this. Problem 1, there's a monster bigger than the giants taking all the kids away. But his response to that is, unfortunately, he won't be able to save the kids. Problem 2, hearing the mothers wailing is an unbearable sight. But his response to that is, unfortunately, the enemy is a woman, so he can't kick her. We have an added note that the giants, of course, refuse to give up this battle. We get some insane emotional moments from Ripley and Colin while Sanji goes over problem 3. He doesn't want to see a woman in tears, but he cannot take part in that fight. But he has a solution. Go straight to the root of the problem, Killingham. During Sanji's clash with Killingham, the Holy Knight mentions there's a big difference in fighting an enemy that's tough versus fighting an enemy that's immortal. But he does note that if Sanji's successful, he will also defeat all the Sleep Tids as well, which is something that we did assume, but it's nice to have some confirmation on that. But Sanji mentions he knows what they are weak against. And Killingham just bursts out in laughter saying, oh, can you use the color of the Supreme King? Well, if so, then why don't you take me out right now? And here we go. Sanji begins to remember the moment that Gabon was speaking with Zoro about how his Conqueror's Haki was just leaking out. And of course, we saw Sanji ask, hey, Gabon, do I also have Conqueror's Haki? And turns out, Gabon mentions that he should have the potential for it. But for whatever reason, Sanji has this masochistic instability, basically saying that he has put up some kind of limiter, some kind of blocker, keeping him from unlocking this potential. But Gabon says that you yourself must be a king if you ever wanted to make Luffy king of the pirates. And in this moment, our Mr. Prince contemplates finally becoming the king he's always been meant to be. What a massive moment for Sanji fans. This has obviously been one of the biggest debates in the community for so long, but especially since Wano when we saw Zoro genuinely using some Conqueror's Haki. And personally, I've been a bit indifferent about this concept. I really didn't mind either way if Sanji got Conqueror's Haki or not. But that being said, seeing the types of enemies that we're facing here in the endgame, it is pretty crucial for Sanji to be able to use some kind of Conqueror's Haki. But in my eyes, I've always seen Zoro and Sanji as equals, but they just provide different things to the crew. Zoro is more of a strength build where he's focused more on his attack power and his output, where Sanji is more of a defense build. He has this specialized body where he can tank hits. So that being said, the sword and the shield of the Pirate King still work out well whether Sanji has Conquerors or not. But that being said, now that we are dealing with Holy Knights and dealing with enemies that absolutely need Conqueror's Haki to be defeated, this was necessary, and I am so excited to see this happen in the next couple chapters. Another interesting thing I've seen brought up with this Sanji and Killingham fight is, what if Killingham brings one of Sanji's biggest fears out, and then what would that be? I think it's very possible that we see Sanji's father or some kind of amalgamation of that in his fears, but I think it's more likely that we see Sanji fighting himself, kind of like Link fighting his shadow version in Ocarina of Time. Sanji will have to fight his own demons. A core principle of Sanji's character development is his insecurities within himself. He struggles with self-worth and who he is, and the fact that his father tried to make him something else. So I think it's very possible we see Sanji fighting some kind of crazy version of himself. And in that battle, he comes to terms with his inner demons, and that is what helps him become the king that he needs to be. So either way, I think Killingham is an awesome matchup for Sanji, and I cannot wait to see how this fight is going to progress. But that leads us to the final panel of this chapter, and it was truly legendary. One of the sickest title cards I've ever seen for a fight in any manga. We've got King of the World, Saint Nerona Emu versus Emperor of the Sea, Monkey D. Luffy. Luffy is obviously gone full Gear 5 now, and Emu says, "There you are, Joy Boy." And Luffy responds with, "Stop calling me by all these different names. I'm Luffy, the man who will be king of the pirates." And with that, we end another legendary chapter. If I'm being honest, I did not think we were going to see a proper battle between Emu and Luffy here on Elbaph. But it turns out I was wrong, because it looks like the battle's going to start within the next chapter or two. That being said, I'm still very confident in the fact that A, this is not Emu at their full power, and B, Emu cannot spend much more time here. And at the same time, this chapter has set up two distinct fights that are going to have a massive effect on Imu, with Zoro versus Sommers and Sanji versus Killingham. As we saw when Loki killed King Harold, the death of a holy knight genuinely affects Imu. It's as if they have given a piece of their soul to that person, and when that person is killed, that injures Imu as well, much like the Horcruxes in Harry Potter. So that being said, during this fight with Luffy and Imu, when Zoro successfully kills Sommers and Sanji successfully kills Killingham, what is Imu going to do? Personally, I think that'll be the moment that he dips out of Elbaph, decides to cut his losses, go back to the Holy Land, and crash out over there. But there's also another wild card that we have set up in this chapter, and that, of course, is Princess Shuri. The ice is melting, she's about to be released, and we're about to have the reunion Brook has been waiting for with this princess. But what are we going to get? She is still technically a holy knight. She has been brainwashed by Imu. We've seen some cracks begin to show, but we genuinely do not know to what degree Imu has control over her at this point. And another interesting thing that was set up in the previous chapter is her eyes and her potential abilities. What kind of ability does this heterochromia actually provide when awakened? And could that ability be used to maybe sever her holy knight connection? I've also seen a lot of theories saying that heterochromia could provide some insane level of observation hockey, like something far beyond what we've seen with base level observation or even advanced observation. Seeing as how we have a lot of prophecies within this world, but no idea as to how these people knew these things. Look at the Harley text, for example. How did children know what the entire story of the entire world, including the future, would be? Maybe one of them had this heterochromia awakening. But with all of that being said, I could not be more excited about the future of One Piece with where this chapter left us off. We are officially at the moment that final line in the third world of the Harley text mentions, and they will surely meet. That has to be Luffy and Imu, and here they are on the battlefield facing each other with an official title card. This chapter has set up 3 legendary fights. Sanji is looking like he's about to unlock some Conqueror's Haki, and Princess Shuri is about to be freed from the ice. There is so much on the cusp of this story, and I am so excited. But as always, guys, let me know what you're thinking in the comments. Let me hear your favorite theories and your predictions for what's going to happen in the future. And if you've made it this far in the video, thank you so much for locking in with me. I hope you enjoy this style of long form content. If you would like to interact more with the community, I do One Piece live streams every Sunday when the new episodes and chapters drop, and I also post that over on my Patreon if you missed the stream. I of course have a Discord in the bio. Me and some friends have a podcast called 3 Episode Test where we talk about all things anime, of course including One Piece and the manga. And of course I have a full schedule posted over on Twitch if you want to catch any other streams as well. Thank you so much for locking in with me. As always, tell the people you love them, touch some grass and drink some water, and I will see you guys in the next video.